They say wisdom comes with age, but as we are about to see, sometimes age just comes alone. Mother Nature gave us all a survival instinct, but it seems a few folks decided to leave theirs in the glove compartment. We are looking at 10 incredible examples of why common sense isn't actually that common anymore. Consider this video a safety manual written in reverse, a collection of tragic lessons on exactly what not to do if you plan on sticking around. 1. You know, most countries have national sports that involve kicking a ball, hitting a puck, or maybe just running really fast away from responsibilities. But in Finland, they decided that wasn't intense enough. They invented a sport where the primary objective is to sit absolutely still in a wooden box and slowly cook yourself like a Thanksgiving turkey until your kidneys wave a white flag. Welcome to the World Sauna Championships, an event that combined the stoic endurance of a marathon runner with the biological preservation instincts of a moth flying into a bug zapper. Our protagonist for this sweaty saga is a local legend named Timo, a man whose bloodstream was chemically indistinguishable from antifreeze and whose competitive spirit was fueled entirely by vodka and a refusal to listen to basic biology. Timo wasn't just a sauna enthusiast, he was a gladiator of steam, a man who viewed the boiling point of water as merely a suggestion rather than a warning. On the day of the finals, the sauna was cranked up to a hellish 230 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature usually reserved for slow roasting pork shoulder, not for human recreation. The rules were simple: sit there, don't leave, and try not to die. Timo was locked in a dead heat with a Russian rival, and neither man was willing to be the first to concede, because apparently suffering third-degree burns is preferable to the shame of opening a door. Now, let's talk about the physiology of stupid. At that temperature, the human body stops sweating because the sweat evaporates instantly, and your skin begins to undergo a process chefs call the Maillard reaction, which is great for steaks but terrible for Finnish men. As the minutes ticked by, the crowd cheered, completely unaware they were watching a slow-motion biological meltdown in real time. Timo sat there with his skin bubbling, his eyes fixed in a stare that wasn't determination, but actually his brain cells misfiring en masse. He had turned a relaxing spa treatment into a standoff with the Grim Reaper, and the Reaper was holding a ladle of water. When the judges finally realized that the competitors weren't just being tough, but were actually in the process of being sous vide cooked, they rushed in to drag them out. Timo technically won the match because he was the last man to be pulled from the oven, but his victory lap was cut short by the fact that he was in total system organ failure. He had literally boiled himself from the inside out, proving that while the mind is strong, the liver really hates being steamed. He died shortly after, leaving behind a legacy as the undisputed champion of bad decisions, and the competition was permanently banned because it turns out that competitive dying is bad for insurance premiums. 2. If you've ever been hiking, you know there are two types of people on the trail: the gearheads who spent $4,000 on titanium sporks and GPS watches, and then there are the guys like our next hero, let's call him Brad. Brad was the kind of guy who thought nature was just a theme park that hadn't been paved yet, and he was tired of his friends mocking his slow pace on their descent from an Oregon peak. They were navigating a steep, ice-covered glacier, a treacherous landscape that demanded crampons, ice axes, and a healthy respect for gravity. Brad, however, possessed none of these things. What he did have was a cheap, distinctively yellow plastic rain poncho and an ego the size of the mountain he was standing on. Looking at the icy slope that dropped away into the abyss, Brad didn't see a death trap. He saw a shortcut. Ignoring the massive, bright yellow signs that screamed "extreme danger" and "fatal drop-offs," signs that legal teams practically beg you to read, Brad announced he was going to speedrun the descent. He sat on his flimsy plastic poncho, intending to use it as a makeshift sled, convinced that he could steer with his heels like he was on a gentle bunny hill at a ski resort. Here is a quick physics lesson that Brad skipped. Plastic has a coefficient of friction of almost 0 on ice. The moment he pushed off, he didn't just slide, he launched. He instantly transformed from a hiker into a human ballistic missile. His friends watched in horror as Brad accelerated to speeds that would get you a ticket in a school zone, his gleeful "woohoo" rapidly morphing into a terrifying Doppler effect scream of regret. Without any way to brake or steer, he was at the mercy of pure momentum. He rocketed down the slope, bouncing over ruts and ice patches, his plastic chariot disintegrating beneath him until it was just Brad and the ice. He covered over 1,000 feet in a matter of seconds, bypassing hours of hiking, but also bypassing his remaining lifespan. The bottom of the glacier wasn't a soft pile of powder. It was a field of jagged, unforgiving volcanic rocks that had been waiting there for a few million years, just for this moment. Brad hit the rock field at roughly 40 miles per hour, coming to a stop so sudden it would have impressed a crash test dummy. Search and rescue teams later noted that while his descent was record-breakingly fast, his survival strategy was non-existent. He proved that in the game of rock, paper, scissors, rock always beats idiot in a poncho. 3. There is a special subset of the population that believes the best way to spend a Saturday night is breaking into condemned buildings to shout at dust motes in the dark. We are talking, of course, about amateur ghost hunters, a hobby that combines trespassing with role-playing. A particularly bright group of these supernatural enthusiasts decided to investigate a famously abandoned asylum, a place with a dark history and an even darker interior. They weren't there to document history. They were there to get spooky content for their 12 subscribers on social media. Deep in the bowels of the rotting facility, they stumbled upon the holy grail of creepy artifacts, the Electroshock therapy room. It was like a horror movie set design came to life, complete with the ominous metal chair, leather straps, and a control panel that looked like it was built by a mad scientist in the 1950s. The atmosphere was heavy, the shadows were long, and the collective IQ of the group dropped to single digits. One of the guys, clearly the class clown of the group, decided it would be hilarious to sit in the chair to channel the spirits. He hopped in, and his friends, giggling like toddlers, strapped his wrists and ankles into the ancient, stiff leather restraints. It was the perfect photo op, until one of his buddies noticed the heavy iron lever on the wall panel. Now, a logical person would assume the power was off in an abandoned building. However, a smart person knows that many old institutions maintain live feeds for fire suppression systems, security alarms, or emergency lighting circuits that often run through ancient, bypassed wiring in the walls. These guys were neither logical nor smart. The friend grabbed the rusted switch and, with a dramatic clear, slammed it into the on position as a joke. The joke, unfortunately, was on them. The building's ancient electrical grid was indeed still live, connected to a municipal backup line that had never been severed. The switch completed a circuit that hadn't been closed in 40 years. The transformer hummed to life with the angry buzz of 1,000 hornets, and raw, unregulated electricity surged through the path of least resistance, the metal chair. The man strapped in didn't even have time to scream. His ghost channeling session turned into a live execution instantly. His friend stood there, frozen in terror, as the smell of ozone and burning hair filled the room, realizing too late that they had come looking for the dead, and through sheer, monumental stupidity, they had managed to create a fresh one right in front of their eyes. The police report later noted the irony. The asylum hadn't claimed a victim in decades, until these guys decided to do the maintenance work themselves. 4. Usually the phrase, "Hey guys, watch this," is the prelude to a minor injury or a stain on the carpet. But in the case of a particularly ambitious party animal in England, let's call him the human chimney, it was the opening line of his own obituary. We've all met this guy. He's the one whose self-esteem is entirely dependent on the volume of applause he can extract from a room full of strangers, treating his body not as a biological temple, but as a discount prop for low-budget magic tricks. The setting was a standard, rowdy house party, the kind where the music is too loud, the decisions are too poor, and the collective IQ drops with every open beer can. Our hero felt the energy in the room dipping and decided he needed to perform a feat of strength to reassert his dominance as the alpha of the kitchen island. He rejected standard parlor tricks like opening a bottle with his teeth or juggling limes. No, he needed something elemental, something dangerous. He announced to the gathered crowd that he possessed the supernatural ability to swallow a lit cigarette, a trick he had likely seen in a movie or a fever dream, and assumed required no practice whatsoever. Now, a quick biology lesson for those who slept through science class. The human esophagus is a soft, moist, mucus-lined tube designed for lukewarm soup and chewed-up sandwiches. It is decidedly not designed to transport a stick of burning tobacco that reaches temperatures of nearly 900 degrees Fahrenheit at the tip. But our hero, fueled by liquid courage and a complete lack of foresight, lit the cigarette, took a deep drag to ensure the cherry was glowing a bright, angry orange, and dropped it onto his tongue. With a dramatic gulp and a look of supreme confidence, he swallowed. The crowd gasped, half in horror and half in anticipation of him vomiting, but he managed to keep it down. For exactly 3 seconds, he stood there with his chest puffed out, looking like he had just conquered nature itself. But inside his throat, a catastrophic biological war had just been declared. The burning ember didn't magically extinguish. It tumbled down the hatch, searing the delicate tissues of his throat with the intensity of a branding iron. The body's reaction to being burned from the inside is immediate and aggressive: inflammation. His esophagus and windpipe didn't just get irritated, they swelled shut with terrifying speed, a condition known as acute laryngeal edema. It was the biological equivalent of slamming a door and locking it. His look of triumph dissolved into panic as he realized that no air was getting in or out. He clawed at his throat, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with the party decor, while his friends initially laughed, thinking it was part of the pantomime. By the time they realized he was actually choking on his own swollen flesh, it was too late. He collapsed on the linoleum, suffocated by the aftermath of his own ego, proving that while you can technically swallow fire, you can only do it once and the hangover is permanent. 5. In the snowy, desolate expanses of rural Russia, boredom is a powerful force, often leading men to invent games that would make a health and safety inspector weep openly. This brings us to Dmitry and Ivan, two friends who found themselves in possession of a wooden crate they had scavenged from an abandoned Soviet-era storage depot. Inside were heavy metallic cartridges that looked, to their untrained and vodka-blurred eyes, exactly like heavy-duty flare gun rounds. You know, the kind used to signal for help or just to make pretty red lights in the sky to amuse the bears. Dmitry and Ivan, whose combined knowledge of military ordnance could be written on a grain of rice with a crayon, decided that the only logical way to celebrate this find was to stage an old-school duel. But they were gentlemen, not savages, so they agreed they wouldn't shoot at each other. Instead, they would stand back-to-back, walk 10 paces, and fire the flares into the air to see whose went higher. It was to be a competition of pyrotechnic prowess. They grabbed the rounds and a couple of hammers because they lacked the actual launcher and figured they could just strike the primers manually like they were popping oversized percussion caps. Here is the critical data point they missed. The rounds were not flares. They were 40mm VOG-25 fragmentation grenades designed for a GP-25 underbarrel launcher. These devices are not meant to create a festive sparkle. They are designed to turn a 5-meter radius into a no-go zone for organic matter. The internal fuse of a VOG-25 is sensitive and relies on impact and rotation, but with enough brute force applied to the primer, which our heroes were more than happy to provide, they can absolutely be triggered. So the scene was set. Two men, standing back-to-back in the snow, looking like the cover of a bad action movie, counting down from 3. On 1, they both struck the bases of their respective rounds. They expected a whoosh and a trail of red smoke. What they got was the immediate deafening detonation of high-explosive anti-personnel warheads right between their shoulder blades. There was no mesmerizing light show, no graceful arc of phosphorus, just a violent thundering boom that shook the snow off the pine trees for miles around. The blast didn't just settle the bet, it settled everything. When the authorities eventually investigated the smoking crater, they didn't find a winner or a loser. They found a very definitive lesson on why you should never treat military surplus like 4th of July leftovers. Dmitry and Ivan had gone out with a bang, achieving a tie in the game of life where the only winning move is to not hammer grenades. 6. Romance can make people do crazy things like writing bad poetry or moving to New Jersey, but for a young Russian man named Alexei, crazy wasn't enough. He needed cinematic. Alexei was insecure in his relationship and had a burning, idiotic question. How much would my girlfriend cry if I died? Most people would answer this by, I don't know, asking her. But Alexei decided to conduct a live fire experiment. He concocted a plan to stage a fake fatal car accident, wait for his girlfriend to arrive at the scene and collapse in grief, and then he would resurrect from the wreckage, wipe away her tears, and propose with a diamond ring. It was a plan that relied heavily on his acting skills and completely ignored the laws of kinetic energy. He scouted a lonely road and picked a sturdy oak tree as his co-star. The script called for him to drive his car into the tree at a controlled speed, fast enough to crumple the hood and make it look terrifying, but slow enough to walk away with a few scratches. But here is where the director inside his head made a fatal error in the wardrobe department. He thought, if I'm wearing a seatbelt, I won't look like a tragic victim, I'll look like a guy sitting in a parked car. He wanted to be slumped over the steering wheel, looking vulnerable and broken, to really sell the drama to his girlfriend. So, to ensure maximum realism, he deliberately unbuckled his seatbelt. He lined up the car, took a deep breath, and floored the accelerator. The problem is, humans are terrible at estimating the violence of a car crash. He aimed for a gentle, 15 mm impact. But amidst the adrenaline and the slick road conditions, he hit the tree with significantly more enthusiasm. Physics, which has never cared about romance, took over immediately. When a car hits an immovable object, it stops instantly. The unsecured object inside the car, Alexei, keeps moving at the original speed. Without the seatbelt to catch him, he didn't slump dramatically over the wheel. He became a human projectile. He was launched with tremendous force through the windshield, his body interacting with the tree and the glass in ways that are incompatible with life. He died instantly on impact. When his girlfriend arrived, having been summoned by a mysterious text he sent earlier, she found the wreckage and her boyfriend's body. She collapsed, screaming and crying, giving him exactly the reaction he had hoped for. The irony is as heavy as the tree he hit. His plan worked perfectly. He successfully staged a tragedy that proved she loved him, and he even got the realism he wanted. The only glitch in the script was that he wasn't around to hear the applause or pop the question. He had directed his own final scene, a one-take wonder with absolutely zero chance for a sequel. 7. We currently live in a golden age of technology where we have collectively decided to outsource our entire sense of direction and spatial awareness to a small, rectangular computer that lives on our dashboard. For most people, a GPS is a helpful tool, a digital map that occasionally saves us 5 minutes on a commute. But for a man in Russia named Sergei, the GPS was not a tool. It was a deity. Sergei was a technological fundamentalist, the kind of guy who believed that if the digital lady with the robotic voice said a road existed, then by God, reality would simply have to bend to accommodate her. It was a dark, rainy night, the classic setting for bad decisions, and Sergei was navigating a stretch of highway that was undergoing massive, industrial-scale renovations. We aren't talking about a single cone and a guy with a shovel. We are talking about a construction zone that looked like a scene from a disaster movie. There were flashing orange strobe lights, concrete jersey barriers, and massive reflective signs screaming, "Road closed," and "Bridge out," in letters large enough to be read from the International Space Station. However, Sergei's GPS, which presumably hadn't been updated since the fall of the Soviet Union, insisted that the highway was wide open. When the device chirped, "In 200 feet, continue straight," Sergei faced a critical philosophical choice. Believe the evidence of his own eyes, which showed a barricade and a pile of dirt, or believe the machine. In a display of stubbornness that borders on the pathological, he turned to his passenger and famously muttered, "The satellite is never wrong. It knows the shortcuts." He truly believed the construction signs were merely suggestions, or perhaps a conspiracy to slow him down. With the unearned confidence of a man marching toward his doom, he swerved his sedan around the plastic barriers, bypassed the danger signs, and followed the GPS's instruction to the letter. He accelerated past the warning lights and drove directly off the edge of the finished pavement. The problem, of course, was that the shortcut was actually a 20-foot deep excavation pit dug for a new municipal sewer line. Gravity, which is notoriously difficult to argue with, took over immediately. The car plummeted into the abyss, nosediving into the mud and concrete at highway speeds. Sergei was killed instantly on impact, a victim of his own refusal to accept that the real world takes precedence over a digital map. The tragic irony is that as the dust settled over the wreckage in the dark pit, the GPS likely chimed in with one final, mocking message: "You have arrived at your destination." And in a grim, metaphysical sense, he certainly had, proving that while satellites are smart, they can't fix a driver who is disconnected from reality. 8. There is a very specific, very dangerous intersection where alcohol, testosterone, and wildlife converge, and nowhere is this intersection busier than in the swamps of Texas. Our next cautionary tale takes place at a marina late at night, a humid environment where the beers are cold, the humidity is high, and the collective IQ is rapidly approaching room temperature. The protagonist is a local man we'll call Tom, a guy whose confidence was inversely proportional to his survival instincts and who believed that rules were just challenges waiting to be accepted. The marina had a very strict, very clear rule posted on every available surface: no swimming, alligators. These signs were not decorative suggestions. The water was known to be the hunting ground of a massive, 11-foot American alligator, a biological dinosaur that had survived millions of years of evolution specifically by eating things that splashed. On this particular night, the alligator was actually visible, floating ominously near the docks like a prehistoric log with eyes, watching the humans with cold, reptilian indifference. A crowd had gathered to look at the beast from the safety of the pier, pointing and whispering in hushed tones, respecting the clear danger. But Tom, fueled by a night of heavy drinking and a lifetime of bad choices, wasn't impressed. He looked at the apex predator, a killing machine with a bite force of 3,000 pounds per square inch, and felt his fragile ego being challenged. He stripped off his shirt, turned to the horrified onlookers, and shouted the famous last words that should be etched on his tombstone: "Fuck that alligator." He wasn't going to let a glorified lizard tell him where he could swim. Determined to prove his dominance and show that he was the true alpha of the swamp, Tom leaped off the dock and splashed into the water, practically landing on top of the animal. He wanted to show he wasn't afraid. The alligator, however, didn't care about Tom's bravery, his social status, or his insults. It only cared that a large, slow-moving sack of calories had just delivered itself for dinner. The reaction was instantaneous. Before Tom could even finish his first stroke or realize that the water was cold, the alligator struck. There was a splash, a scream that was cut tragically short, and then silence. Tom wanted to prove a point about human superiority, but instead, he provided a very graphic demonstration of the food chain. He died not because of bad luck, but because he picked a fight with a creature that has been perfecting the art of killing since the Triassic period, proving that while alcohol gives you courage, it sadly does not give you armor plating or common sense. 9. We often think of deadly animals as lions, bears, or sharks. But if you look at the statistics, the humble farmyard chicken is surprisingly lethal, especially if you are actively ignoring every single survival instinct you possess. This brings us to a woman in the rural US who was the proud owner of a backyard coop, and, specifically, a notoriously aggressive rooster. This bird wasn't just a morning alarm clock. It was a feathered velociraptor, a creature of pure hate and spur that attacked anything that moved with the fury of a Spartan warrior. Now, keeping a mean rooster is one thing, but this woman had a very specific, very dangerous medical condition: severe varicose veins. Her doctor had been crystal clear, using terrifying words like life-threatening, hemorrhage, and fragile. He told her that the veins in her legs were so enlarged and the walls so paper-thin that a single scratch, bump, or peck could cause catastrophic bleeding that wouldn't stop. He essentially told her, "Your legs are ticking time bombs. Protect them at all costs." A logical person would interpret this as wear thick pants, wear tall rubber boots, or better yet, turn that rooster into soup immediately. But our heroine decided that fashion and convenience were more important than arterial integrity. On the fateful day, she went out to collect eggs, wearing nothing on her legs but a pair of shorts and flip-flops. She walked into the danger zone with her vulnerable veins completely exposed, effectively walking into a knife fight carrying a balloon. The rooster, sensing an intruder in his domain, did exactly what he always did. He charged. He wasn't trying to murder her. He was just being a territorial jerk, but biology doesn't care about intent. He pecked at her leg, and his sharp beak found the swollen varicose vein with the precision of a laser-guided missile. The thin skin gave way instantly. The result was not a minor cut. It was a major medical event. The vein burst, and because of the high pressure in the varicose vessel, the blood loss was rapid, dramatic, and uncontrollable. She collapsed in the coop, unable to stop the flow, and tragically bled to death in a matter of minutes, surrounded by the chickens she was trying to feed. It was a death that was 100% preventable. A pair of $10 denim jeans or a pair of high rubber boots would have acted as armor and saved her life. Instead, she became the only person in history to lose a duel to a chicken because she refused to dress for the occasion, proving that sometimes comfort kills. 10. The criminal underworld is often romanticized in movies as a place full of masterminds, high-tech gadgets, and complex plans. But the reality is usually just two guys named Dave and Steve making terrible decisions in a parking lot at 3 a.m. This brings us to a historic church in England, the scene of a crime that was doomed not by police intervention, but by a complete misunderstanding of Isaac Newton's laws of motion. Two thieves decided to steal the lead plating from the church roof. Now, lead is heavy, that's kind of its main selling point, and carrying it down a ladder is backbreaking work. So, they devised a plan that they thought was genius in its simplicity. They would let gravity do the work. One man would go up to the roof, pry up the massive sheets of metal, and shove them over the edge. The second man, the spotter, would wait on the ground with their pickup truck. His job was to watch for police and signal when it was safe to drop the loot. It was a simple plan, but it had a fatal flaw centered entirely on where the spotter chose to stand. The truck was parked directly below the drop zone to catch the metal. The spotter, taking his job very seriously, decided that the best vantage point to ensure the metal landed in the truck was to stand inside the truck bed himself. He apparently thought he could guide the falling metal like an air traffic controller landing a plane. He looked around, saw no police, and gave his partner on the roof a confident, enthusiastic thumbs up. He was standing directly in the crosshairs. The thief on the roof, unable to see his partner's exact position over the ledge, took the signal literally. He heaved a massive 200-pound sheet of lead over the parapet. It plummeted 50 feet, gathering speed and force with every inch. The spotter looked up just in time to realize that his calculations regarding where the lead goes and where my head is were tragically overlapping. The metal sheet slammed into the truck bed and the spotter with the force of a guillotine blade. He was crushed instantly, killed by the very loot he was trying to steal. When the police eventually arrived, they didn't have to do any detective work. They found the lead, the truck, the guy on the roof who was stuck there with no ladder, and the spotter who had successfully caught the package with his face. It was a heist that failed because the spotter forgot that two objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time, especially when one of them is a falling anvil and the other is a criminal genius. We have just witnessed 10 undeniable reasons why safety regulations exist. Now, I have a serious question for you to answer in the comments. Looking at these cases, do you think society needs more warning labels to save people like this? Or are we interfering too much with nature's own selection process? I want to hear your honest opinion on where we draw the line. And if you believe this video serves as a necessary public warning, hit that hype button to help us spread the message.